Coming over to the type of or types of performance, you will notice that performance can actually be actual or complete performance, wherein all the obligations under the contract has been fulfilled, every duty that was expected in the contract has been performed. Uh, Generally, when such a contract has been completed in its performance, the contract ceases to exist, and a party who completes the performance of the contract can expect the simultaneous or mutual performance from the other party. This is the kind of performance that concludes the contract. As against that, there is another kind of performance that can be also important for consideration, is called partial performance. Now, partial performance, friends, is, of course, it's not complete, it's uncompleted. There could be some reason for non-completion, or the party may be unwilling to perform due to certain factors, misunderstandings, circumstances. And in these kinds of cases of partial performance, the important rule would be the rule of quantum merit. Now, quantum merit, or QM as it is called, will be critical in case of the fact that, look, if partial performance is something that can be evaluated as some kind of performance, right? Say it is 30% of the 100% performance that is expected, and let's assume that it's a works contract. Now, the 30% that is already performed, now 70% is not performed, it is amounting to breach, but the 30% that is already being performed, I think the government or any other agency that has hired the contractor will have to at least pay to the extent of 30%. The principal rule on quantum merit is you will quantify the partial performance, you will evaluate the partial performance, and to the extent of the performance that is completed, even though partially, to that extent the contractor has to be paid. Now, you should understand that partial performance is a kind of a ground for the application of quantum merit. How much is the quantum of work? What is the merit to be applied, and how much can be paid? Will apply in those cases wherein you can have what we call as the severability doctrine. Now, the doctrine of severability applies even to performance, which means if the 30% can be severed and it can be separately valued in terms of the merit and the quantum of work that is already being done, then in those circumstances, the contractor can claim his due. He can claim his amount. But if that 30% cannot be separated in terms of what has been done, and the severability doctrine cannot be applied, then partial performance will not amount to discharge of contract, rather it will amount to breach of contract. So partial performance is also quite an important type of performance in those cases where we talk about long-term business agreements, and what is being done so far has to be paid, right? So no person can unduly or unjustly get benefit from someone else's performance, even though it is made partial. Attempted performance, we already discussed about this. This is like tendering of performance. So when the performance has become due, you make an offer saying that I will do the performance, I will sell the goods, but the buyer refuses to buy. Then in those circumstances, tendering of performance is considered as good performance, and it amounts to discharge of a contract. Of course, vicarious performance is when you ask your representative to perform, and in these circumstances, usually there is no personal skill or labor that is involved. It's not a contract for personal service. So instead of, say, me paying if someone else pays, or if instead of me doing someone else does, it does not affect the quality or quantity of the purpose of the contract. And then in those circumstances, instead of you, someone competent enough can also be deployed to make the performance of a contract. Finally, substantial performance, I've already discussed about it, but however, the main essential points in this case is that substantial performance is considered as complete performance, wherein the claim of breach cannot be sustained. So your claim of substantial performance is much better than the claim of breach from the other party. So the court in that case finds that the allegation of breach is very, very superficial. It's negligible. It is not something that needs a serious due consideration. It's more of a complaint rather than of a breach of contract, right? That is when the claim of substantial performance can be applied. Now, the The justification of the doctrine of substantial performance is to avoid the possibility of one party evading his liability by claiming that the contract has not been completely performed. Right? It is applicable only if the contract is not an entire contract and is severable. In case it can be severed, and it's a matter of fact, and it is decided according to the fact and circumstances of each case. I've already also mentioned the same. It does not mostly apply to sale of goods. It can apply to construction or employment contracts where substantial performance can be claimed. Because in a sale of goods, it's a one-time sale of goods, right? So you cannot say that you go, okay, so I've given you the phone without the battery, and that is substantial performance. You can't say that. I think the phone will work only with the battery, right? So I think in most cases, these kinds of pleas apply to works, construction, or employment-related contract. So that's what substantial performance is. However, the opposite of substantial performance is called strict compliance, which means it's not 90%, it's not 99%, right? Unless it's 100%, we cannot do away with the plea, and 100% will only ensure discharge. Otherwise, it will amount to breach of contract. So, strict rule of performance can be expected in certain kinds of contract, and substantial performance is not a plea that can be accepted in most circumstances. If we analyze a few cases on performance and how do courts evaluate performance to either admit the plea of substantial performance or to negate the same and hold it for breach, this is a very interesting case. It is a case where a contractor was hired for the repair of a house. Now, of course, when you do some repair of any house, you do give certain requirements for the same. And in this case, the concrete underpinning, that is the kind of foundation columns that were required to support a window, the requirement was for a 5-inch diameter kind of a concrete underpinning, right? And this was stated to the contractor. However, the contractor went ahead and built it in terms of the columns of concrete that is required to support the window, so that the bay window could have certain angle, and this was the whole requirement, right? It's a kind of a construction requirement. But the contractor only constructed 4-inch diameter solid, concrete wall. Now, one of the referees. Now, I did say in the past that there can be a dispute review board in construction contract. So in this case, there was a referee, and he found that the contractor had not performed the contract because he was supposed to do 5-inch, he did 4-inch, and hence he could not claim the payment at all. That is what was stated in this case. Now, see, if you come to this conclusion that the contractor need not be paid because he had committed a breach, instead of 5-inch, he has only done 4-inch, then all the labor material that has been used so far will have to be returned back. Now, it cannot be a situation where the owner of the house continues to enjoy my labor and skill, though it was not done effectively or efficiently, but at the same time does not compensate me for the same. So the court in this case did come to this conclusion that there is a distinction between failing to complete and completing it badly. Now, please note, if what has been completed badly affects the structure, the kind of safety of the house, then it cannot be considered as performance. Yeah, so that is completely understandable. But there is always the skill and labor in which the completion of work either is very good, or it can be judged to be very ordinary, or completely very bad. But I think the contractor in this case did try to complete. He did try to match up to the expectation of the contractor. Yes, 1 inch shorter, but nevertheless there was performance. Of course, it was not done as per the requirement, and it was not done as expected. But it is not the case that he had not completed the work at all, right? So in this case, what did the court held? Now, please note, how does quantum merit operate in this case? You might have quoted for a 5-inch diameter, concrete underpinning. You have done only 4-inch. So of course you cannot be paid the entire amount of the contract. There has to be a deduction of the fact that how much you have not worked, or how much you have. It's like imposing a penalty for badly completed work. But nevertheless, it can be considered as performance in terms of quantifying the merit of the performance and quantifying the work that has already been completed. The contractor has to be paid, right? So that is how. In this case, the court tries to evaluate performance and lay down the grounds for performance, and also states that even in performance, the principal rule of adjusted enrichment will definitely apply. In case you can evaluate and quantify, then it is well and good. Now, another case that you would want to look at is a very interesting one. Sometimes, this is where you should understand that the courts sometimes go by the very strict rule of compliance as against the substantial rule of performance. Now, in some cases, strict rules, they do not want to make a compromise at all. And they say, unless you comply strictly with the requirements of the contract, we will not take performance. As is in some cases where substantial performance is kind of, okay, it's fine, it's done with. So we can allow that performance of contract like you saw in the previous case. Now, in this current case, very interestingly, there was a order that was placed for 3,100 tins of peaches from this company called F.W. Moore and Company. Now, F.W. Moore was the purchaser. This laundry was a company that was a buyer, Launier. And the contract between the parties stipulated that the consignment is required to be packed in cases of 30 tins each. So each case is 30 tins. Total 3,100 tins. Now the goods were delivered, the consignment was delivered. However, in each of the packed cases, there were only 24 tins. Okay, so I want one case of 30 tins, but you gave me in one case of 24 tins. But the total number was the same, 3,100. Now the buyer refused to take delivery. He said, no, nothing doing. We will not take delivery of the goods because you did not deliver it as per one case having 30 tins. Now, do you want goods to be sold to you in terms of, say, 3,100 tins total, or do you want it precisely as per what has been shown to you, saying that in one case there will be 30 tins and now he has reduced it to 24 tins? Now, you will notice that the question in this case was the buyer entitled to reject the delivery of the goods? Now, as we said, that strict compliance is usually a requirement in sale of goods, especially when sale of goods by description is made. And the court in this case said that this was a typical sale of goods by description. So you tell how I will sell the goods, and you are supposed to deliver the goods as has been described. And if the goods that are delivered do not correspond to the description, then the sellers who has delivered these goods in a different description will unfortunately have to face rejection. So in this case, the court, going by the strict compliance rule, says that the buyer could reject the goods because they were not as per description. Now, many of us may want to critically evaluate this case, saying it is quite harsh on the seller, because finally, what you want. You want 3,100 tins, right? How is it matter to you saying that it was in a case of 30 or 24 tins, right? What will that do? However, you will notice that in many of these instances, apart from what is being there or stated as the facts of the case, the buyers may actually say, look, if it was in 30 tins per case, I would require lesser storage space. And that is the reason, I had clearly planned to receive the consignment as per 30 tins in one case and not 24 tins. And there was this justification from the buyer as well, right? And secondly, they also say, look, he had said these and these things, and he had to adhere to the same. That's all, right? That's what sale by description actually means. So every description that has been stated by the seller becomes material fact in the sale of goods purpose, and hence a strict compliance is required. And in this case, unfortunately, the plea of substantial performance was not accepted by the court. Another interesting case is this case from 1972, a case of substantial performance, where you will look at a very interesting fact of a boiler system. It's a central heating system that had to be put in a house at the cost of around 560 pounds. Now, in cold places, and the central heating system becomes very critical and very important. And, when the work was completed, of course, the owner of the house, he's turned the system on, and he found that the rooms were not hot, and they were very uncomfortable. So the heating was uneven, though it was heating, but it was uneven. And unfortunately, this was giving rise to certain fumes. And the owner of the house, of course, after he tested the fitting of the central heating system, refused to pay. And he said that the central heating system had completely failed, and he was not willing to pay for the same, because he did not expect this to give fumes or have uneven heating system in his house. So the owner refused to pay because he did not think that there was any kind of performance of the contract as well. Now the court in this case did evaluate this performance. Now, a central heating system, when it is installed, it should heat the house adequately, right? And when you talk about fumes, it makes any living inside the house very, very uncomfortable. And you never know whether the fumes are a result of deficiency in the product and in the piping system, and putting those things, or rectifying the defect and trying to shut the fumes was probably not done by the contractor at all. He had not probably taken those steps. So you don't expect a heating system to actually make you uncomfortable inside the house. It is basically there to build the warmth in the house, especially during cold seasons. And hence, if someone just says, okay, that's a small part, you can always rectify it, or I'll rectify it later, now you pay me the contractual amount, this should amount to substantial performance. The court said, sorry, this cannot amount to substantial performance. So it is not about the work, it is about the work being very ineffective and shoddy, actually going away or against the primary purpose of the contract. You expect a heating system to work efficiently well and heat and do nothing else. And if it does not, then to that extent, you will notice that the court said a plea of substantial performance cannot be accepted. So I think the three cases that we have discussed so far give us an idea about how the plea under Section 37 of substantial performance is accepted in certain cases, and in certain cases as a material factor. If the contract does not fulfill the material objective of the contract, then to that extent, the substantial performance will not be accepted, and a breach would definitely be established. To which extent you will notice that the parties at fault will be held accountable and responsible as well. Finally, let's test whether the following is substantial performance, right? A contract wherein one party must supply 100 pumps, but only 95 were delivered. What do you think? Is this substantial performance? See, this is here where the pumps are okay, but I had ordered 100, but you delivered only 95. Can this be considered substantial performance for which payment is to be done? See, the point here is, if you start using 95, now if you use it under the principal rule of unjust enrichment and restitution, you will have to pay for it. But if you think that the number 100 was material and important, and without 100 pumps you cannot go forward, right? Because that is the reason you have ordered 100 pumps. Then in that cases, based on the facts, circumstances, and subjective character of the contract, that number or the figure in a sale of goods transaction can be considered to be under the strict rule, and you may have the right to reject the consignment, right? So it all depends upon what kind of action you want to perform and what basis you also want to perform. Now, just compare the first example to the next example, where you go to buy a property which was supposed to be 50 acres, but only 48 acres are part of the sale. Can you consider this substantial performance? I'm sure your answer in this case would be absolutely no. Right? In terms of land, whatever is the percentage of land that has been promised to be sold, only that. Anything, even 1 inch, probably less than that, I think people will not compromise, and no substantial performance can ever be considered in these matters. Let's assume you hire a painter, instructing him to paint your house in red color, and he paints it blue. So see, the painting is already done. Right? Now, your house is in blue. Are you okay saying that this is substantial performance? Right? Now, this is something that the painter may say, sir, it's finally of the paint. Your color was red, mine was blue. I have painted your house. Please give me the payment. Now, again, you will notice in these cases that in such cases of painting your house, the choice of color of the customer becomes critical factor. You cannot exercise your own discretion and claim substantial performance by painting blue. Right? A contract states that 150 barrels of oil will be delivered and only 145 barrels are delivered. right? Now, why would anybody want to place an order for 150 barrels? He may have a requirement for the same, right? Now, you cannot just on your own decide to send 145 and say, oh, I have performed the contract, rest 5, he can go and take it from someone else, right? So these kinds of statements are something that, parties will have to be responsible for. Now, let's look at substantial performance in a loan agreement. Now, this is very easy, right? You have taken a loan, and the borrower or the debtor, that is you, who says that, oh, no, it's okay. If I owe you 100 rupees, I pay you 80 rupees back and take it as substantial performance. Will that amount to substantial performance? I'm sure most of us will come to this conclusion that nothing except what is due has to be paid. And in such cases, substantial performance cannot be claimed as a remedy. Right? So I think these examples very clearly give us an idea of what and where this issue of substantial performance can be made as admissible, and in which cases it is not going to be admissible at all. Moving forward in understanding time as the essence of performance, we know that time is important, and contracts may stipulate time, and usually when time is stipulated, it is expected that the performance of the contract be done either before the time or at the time when it is expected, right? Anything beyond that, a question will definitely arise: what happens in case of performance beyond the time prescribed in the contract? So time is critical because that is the basis on which the expectation of contract and commercial matters do take place. Business affects, profitability also affects. So in many circumstances, you will notice that suppose you are flying by a flight or an aeroplane. For you, time is critical. You expect the flight to take off on time, land on time. Similarly, I think when we go to restaurants, if you're very hungry, you expect the food to be delivered on time. Interestingly, I think a lot of these companies now take a lot of privileges in terms of saying, our efficiency is based on time. So you would have Zomato or Swiggy telling you that in case we don't deliver within 20 minutes, you get it free. So time in that sense of a contract is expected to be critical. It is expected to be important. And Section 55 clearly says that, look, how do you try and infer time in a contract? You infer it through the intention of the parties, whether time has been specified, if time is the essence of the contract. If it is so, if the contract is not performed on that time, it becomes voidable, right? Any kind of delay of time. See, there are two consequences. Either I can reject the performance or I can seek compensation for the delayed performance. So then, it becomes actionable. So that's important for us to appreciate over here, that once there is delay in performance, it has to impose some kind of a penalty, or it can also result in, as I told you in the past, it can amount to rejection of goods and consignment as well. Very often than not, one of the critical factors in most work-related contract is extension of time. Now, this is important because time is critical, but extension of time, is it possible? Now, once it is fixed, can you look at extension? That's an important factor that needs to be looked into. How do you look at intention of the parties? You will look into the words used in the contract, the nature of the contract, the nature of property, and the surrounding circumstances. These are four critical factors through which time is judged by the courts of law. Now, why nature of property is because normally under the Transfer of Property Act, if it's the sale of immovable property, the presumption is time is not the essence unless the contrary intention appears from the contract itself, right? Because immovable property, there are a lot of challenges, there are a lot of documentation, a lot of due diligence that is required. So time is not really very much essential there. It's not critical there, and hence, the intention of the parties then would matter. If the parties have clearly mentioned that it is the essence, then it becomes the essence. So the court is not going to unnecessarily read into the time, into the contract. I think they will leave it for the parties to actually determine the same, and whatever is the intention of the parties will be given adequate reflection to. Two cases I think we can take here to understand time as the essence of the contract. One of the cases that I just wanted to talk to you before this Govind Prasad Chakravarti case was a case which involved the Union of India. I remember this case because it was an interesting case of delivery of a consignment, and there was an extension of time that was sought. So once there is extension of time that is sought, and the other party gives that extension, what happens to time, right? Is it waiver of time as being the essence of the contract? So that is something that we have to also consider at this point of time. Now, in Govind Prasad's case, he entered into an agreement with this person called Haridhar. This was in 1964, but the date here becomes very critical because we are talking of time. And it was entered on March 24th, 1964. This was to purchase a property, and please note, Govind Prasad was a tenant. He wanted to purchase the property from Haridhar, who is the landlord in this case. And they entered into an agreement. And Govind Prasad, the tenant, handed over 4,000 rupees as earnest money. It's like advance, right? I want to book the house before we can deal with the detailed terms and conditions of the sale agreement. Now, the terms of the agreement said that Govind Prasad would get the sale deed executed within 2 months. So he was given 2 months' time. And it was fixed at, say, May 24th, 1964. March, April, May. That's the 2 months that was agreed upon in this case. And in case he fails to do so, the earnest money paid by him to Haridhar would stand forfeited if it does not close the sale before May 24th, 1964. This is usually a clause in most immovable property transactions. Unfortunately, Govind Prasad could not conclude the sale deed within that given time. He could not execute within the prescribed time. And Govind Prasad filed a suit against Haridhar for breach of contract. Okay. So the trial court granted the relief of specific performance of the contract. Haridhar appealed to the High Court, and the High Court set aside the order of the trial court on the ground that time of the essence of the contract, and therefore relief of specific performance cannot be granted. Right. So this was the case that was done. So the question here was, in the sale of immovable property, whether time was the essence of the contract. Right. This was mostly the single point issue in this case. Now, what is specific performance of the contract? It means that you are duty bound to purchase the house, duty bound to sell the house. This is exactly precisely what you should do, right? That's what the specific relief says. Now, the Supreme Court in this case did come to this conclusion that in a sale of immovable property, time is usually not the essence of the contract, and hence, in such kinds of contracts, especially the immovable property, say, it will normally be assumed that the parties should try and close the agreement as soon as possible, considering time being important but not very critical. So it's not essence, means it's not core, and this could be evidence from the circumstances from the case itself, which are either in favor of the buyer or in favor of the seller. And in these circumstances, it is, I think, the duty of the seller and the buyer to execute the sale, even if it is beyond May 24th, 1964. Because it is the subject matter is the immovable property, right? So it's not like May 24th is sacrosanct and May 25th the sale deed cannot be executed. It's as simple as that, right? So in those circumstances, I think the court clearly said in such cases where the subject matter is immovable property, time can be extended as well. Another interesting case of extension time is this very famous case of R.K. Saxena versus DDA, the Delhi Development Authority case, again a Supreme Court judgment. Which involved an immovable property itself. So both these two cases you will notice is the subject of immovable property, not movable property or works contract, where time schedule are usually given, and in case that schedule does not operate, liquidated damages are actually imposed as well. So that is how Section 55 is covered in modern day government contracts, right? So you have a time schedule for performance and completion of work, and if those time schedules are not going to be adhered to, liquidated damages, say 0.5% of the contract value for the first week, then it is extended to 1% for the second week, and then the contractual clause says a maximum 5% of the contract value is what liquidated damages can actually be imposed. So that's the modern way or modern times how liquidated damages is actually operated for time, right? So even those circumstances, time is important, and a penalty in the contract itself is stipulated. And a 5% kind of a penalty for delayed performance has been held to be reasonable by the courts of law, because it is covered under Section 74 in terms of pre-estimated kind of a damage for performance on time. Right? Now, R.K. Saxena versus Delhi Development Authority is another case. This was a case of a plot auction and a deposit of EMD. And unfortunately, in this case, R.K. Saxena, who was the highest bidder for the purchase of this site or plot, as we want to call it, this was held in an auction sale. So in an auction sale, of course, the plot is going to be given to the highest bidder. And in a normal process, if you are purchasing or if you are in the procuring side, it is given to the lowest bidder. So RK Saxena won this auction, and as per the terms of the auction, he was supposed to deposit 6,54,500, and he did so on the same day. And the balance 75% of the amount of that auction price that was bidded, that has to be given within 60 days was the condition, right? Now, one of the clauses in this auction advertisement by the DDA was that in certain extraordinary circumstances, if sufficient cause was shown, the chairman of the DDA could extend the time from 60 days to 180 days. So there was already this clause, right? But however, the extension of time would have a penalty of payment of interest of 18%. So if you cannot arrange within 60 days, you can seek extension, but you will be liable to give 18% interest. So, Saxena, wanted extension of time, and he sought the extension of time, and he was willing to pay the interest. And initially, that extension was granted. He sought another extension of time, to which probably the DDA chairperson did not respond to. Right, first extension they gave, but the second extension they did not entertain. Now, the extension of time, interestingly, if time is the essence, why would you extend it? Right? Once if you have given extension, it shows that you no longer seriously want to consider time as the essence of the contract. That is precisely what is argued in this case. And he filed a writ petition on receiving legal notice by the DDA, because DDA wanted to cancel the letter of allotment, and they forfeited the earnest money. And aggrieved by the actions of the DDA, RK Saxena went to the court, and he said that he was willing to perform the contract, and these guys have unilaterally forfeited the earnest money, and they had actually cancelled his allotment as well. The Supreme Court in this case said that, look, once a provision for extension of 180 days has been provided with interest, it clearly shows that the DDA was amenable to request for extension of time, and once they had accepted the same, I think there is a deemed extension of time, because what DDA had done is the subsequent payments that were made by RK Saxena, despite the fact that that extension of time was not given, RK Saxena kept on paying the remaining amount of 75% percent of the side. Those were all accepted by the DDA. Now, once you have accepted a payment, even beyond the time, it means you have affirmed or ratified, and you have actually forgiven him for the delay. Right? That is what is condonation of delay in action in contracts. So the court in this case said that the actions of the DDA amounted to accepting a request for extension of time, accepting payments even which were delayed payments, would amount to an action of deemed extension of time, and hence the actions of the DDA in cancelling the allotment to RK Saxena were found to be unreasonable. So this is how time as the essence of the contract will operate per se, and hence you will notice that if people want to treat time as the essence of the contract, they have to continue to hold that as a valuable action. They should not affirm it or ratify it. They should not condone it in any manner. If they decide to do that, then they would have waived their right to treat time as the essence of it.